Paltrocast. Tom, I have to say, before I say how are you, what an honor and a pleasure it is to be speaking with you, because your music, for better and for worse, is all over this apartment. I grew up on your music. I'm still listening to music that you helped helm all these years later. So thank you for that. Now, how are you?
I'm great. I'm great. I'm retired. I'm blissfully retired. And I'm very pleased about the initial reception for this book, which won't come out for another 2 weeks. Good early reviews, and everyone seems to use the same term, easy read, which
I will use that too. And I'd say you have a few distinctions to this book. One, you remember everything, because so many people in that era have errors in their own memoirs. Number two, it's got a happy ending. How many people from different eras that you produced in, it didn't end up so great? And do we need to keep the compliments going, or should we stop there?
No, we can stop there. And I have to say that I do not remember everything, and you'll find out as soon as you start asking questions. What I'm writing about, is are events that are 40 or 50 years old, and at my age, it ain't easy. To remember details in the book. I think I wrote most of what I remember, what I am able to remember in the book. So at least there was enough to make it interesting.
Right. And my first discovery of you, I mean, I knew the music, but when you're 10 years old, you don't look to say, hey, who produced the record, who engineered it, etc. Was seeing you on a couple of episodes of Behind the Music and going, oh, wait, that guy did that one too, and that one too, and that one too. What was the album that took you from being staff producer to actually sought out producer?
Gee, I don't know how sought out I was, but I was a staff producer for 12 years. For 7 years at Epic. I guess it would be Motley Crue. I would be Shout at the Devil, which was kind of ushered in the hard glam hairband LA thing. But I already made a lot of hit records before I left Epic and became independent. It was really an economic expedient, because they were paying me a pittance, and I made, well over 100 million albums for them that they got full price for, and I got a nickel or 10 cents, and so I needed to go independent.
Right. And it's great to see that it wasn't just one hit, it wasn't just two hits. It was a majority. It was just a great run that you had for a while before you opted to slow down. Most producers, they don't opt to slow down.
Well, I didn't, honestly, as it says in the book, I opted only after it became obvious that I had peaked and that music had changed, and I was not interested in, or maybe capable of, adapting to the music of the 90s, to the Seattle thing, to grunge. I could see the writing on the wall in the late 80s, early 90s. And I didn't want to fade away. So there were one or two other things that I felt I was capable of doing. And so I did one of them.
Well, an irony of the whole grunge thing is your work on the movie Rockstar, which exemplifies the grunge thing, yet used a bunch of 80s musicians to tell that story musically. So that's a cool chapter to have gone out on in terms of being the full-timer.
But since it was in the 80s, I was kind of a logical choice. And I think most of the stuff that they played that we used in the movie was, just as much metal as it was grunge.
Mhm.
And I'm really I've always wondered about the metal thing. I became pigeonholed very early in my producing career, and I found it extremely difficult to break out of that pigeonhole, to climb out of it, because I'm a pop guy, and that's been the standard common complaint, from, if there are complaints, from the bands that I produced, that it just wasn't hard enough. It wasn't, it was too polite, it was too pop, it was too this, and they loved it when it was selling like hotcakes. 20 years later, you sucked.
Yeah, I think that was a quote of yours that I wrote down. They love you when they're selling platinum albums. 20 years later, they like to blame you for every single thing that they were unable to achieve. And I think I mentioned this in my intro email to you, but I worked for Mark Puma, who is Twisted Sister's manager.
Right, I remember Mark. Yeah.
And D is one of those people who complains about you, and
Oh,
you,
God.
well, they say, "Hey, Tom was just a great A&R man." You hear those kinds of stories, and I'm giving you a compliment here. You didn't go out and criticize all these artists and get back in pissing wars all these years. You kind of took the high road for a long time.
Well, I tried to take the high road in the book. I've stopped trying to figure out what Dee Snider's problem is. I just assume, it's too late for me to worry about that now. I'm sure he'll curse me all the way to his grave for destroying his 5 million seller.
That still gets licensed regularly for commercials,
Yeah.
etc.
Yeah, and telling the public that I refused to do this song and that he had to beg me to do it. I didn't think much of "We're Not Going to Take It." I did think it sounded like a bit like a nursery rhyme, so I wasn't that keen on it. But this business about him getting down on his knees and begging me, the producer can't do that. The producer can't say, "We're not going to do that song." He just can't. He's a hired hand. The band hires him and pays him. They can fire him. In this case, Dee was pissed because what's his name? The president of Atlantic, Doug Morris, insisted on me. And I think they wanted, I can't remember who they wanted initially, but Doug Morris said, he called me and he said, "You're the only guy I know who can make a hit with this band." So I was kind of under pressure to make a hit with this band. Anyway, he has the authority. The producer does not have that kind of authority, but Dee has crafted his own story about, his own version of history, and let him go. I mean, he needs to do this, apparently.
Well, a name that you just mentioned, Doug Morris, I don't think he gets a lot of the credit that he deserves, because he said that you were the guy for Twisted Sister. He basically gave Beau Hill his whole career in terms of going, this relatively unknown producer, hey, Rat, this is your guy, you have to use him, etc. So it sounds like Doug is one of the most unsung A&R guys in the history of hard rock.
Yeah, and he wrote a hit song. I can't remember what it was. It was a pop ditty from the late 50s, I think, or maybe the early 60s. Yeah, I can't remember, but it was a little hit. He was good. I think he got angry at me for, someone told him that I complained about a lack of promotional effort for maybe one of the Kicks albums. I'm not sure, but I think he was pissed off at me too. by the time I was finished. I guess I pissed a lot of people off. I tried to be a collaborator, not a dictator, and I think I did a really good job helping these bands to make those hit records.
Yeah.
But hey, they want to complain, yeah, let them complain. That's fine. I have to say, I've rarely heard an artist say great things about his past producers.
That's a
Meanwhile,
very
meanwhile, Jimmy Iovine is quoted as having said, "After 3 albums, you should shoot your producer."
But further to your credit, most producers were trying to force co-writes or writing credits to get the publishing in, which is not
Yeah.
something you did.
Yeah, I would never do that. That was, as far as I was concerned, that was sleazy. And taking advantage of a band at that point in the beginning that had no power, really, no say in the matter. And I'll get you a deal, but I want a cut like this. Songwriting and song arranging is part of the producer's job. So I thought that was greedy. I didn't do it.
Right. Now, one mystery I've been trying to figure out, Mark Puma once told me that a producer that some of his bands had worked with, their test to see whether or not something sounded great was they had a bad car stereo set up on the walls of the studio, car door replica and all, because if it sounded good out of that, then it was going to sound good in general. Was that you?
No, it was A&M Studios who had I think it was a GM car in back of the studio parked there that they had. It was an old car, and they had outfitted it with a cassette player. And so you could take a cassette of your mix out there and play it through the stock GM audio equipment. So, like a 57 Chevy car speaker. And that was the acid test. If it sounded good on that, then it would sound great on anything that was made after that.
Mind blowing right there. And another great who you were synonymous with is Clive Davis. And the story is true that you wrote him a letter and you got hired based on that. But my friend Joe Hassan wanted to know, what was your English SAT score? In other words, were you that great of a writer that's how you got it?
640. It wasn't that
out of 800. That's pretty good.
Yeah, it wasn't that great. I mean, it was good enough to get me into Columbia, but I can write. I'm a better writer than people expect a record producer to be, and I'm a grammatical Nazi. It's like every day I wince 100 times a day when I hear the language being mangled. And I know language evolves, but there are rules, damn it. And people break them all the time. I don't think kids learn to write anymore or speak properly, and it's tough. I'm like every other old guy, back in the day we did this and that, but yeah, I see the language eroding.
I hear you on that. And so with Clive, is that the same era as when you were turned down after you brought Kiss, Lynyrd Skynyrd, and Rush?
Well, it was, yeah, Clive hired me in 1970, and between 70 and 70, I guess 4, I signed REO Speedwagon, but then I tried to sign Rush, Skynyrd, and Kiss, and I was turned down. So that kind of paved the way for me to be able to sign Ted Nugent. I always have to say that politics played no part in my relationship, friendship, or professional, partnership with Ted.
Oh yeah. To interrupt you for a second, I've had the pleasure of interviewing Ted 4 or 5 times, and he might be the easiest artist on the planet to interview because all you have to do is say, "Hi, how are you, Ted?" and he talks for 5 minutes.
Bang, he's gone. He is. I always said that he and David Lee Roth would have the most wonderful talk radio show because
No, I have to interrupt you.
Boo.
because I have a book on Roth coming out soon. So Roth and Nugent do not talk well. One of the times I asked Nugent if he ever met Roth, and he said he couldn't deal with him. He couldn't listen, that it was just psychobabble. So for Ted Nugent to say that it's psychobabble, you go, that's not going to work.
Yeah, I met Roth once briefly. We shared a little contraband backstage. I always very impressed by his, his gift of gab.
Was that on the Poison tour because Skyscraper and Poison had that tour together and you did that record?
I don't remember what occasion it was, but it was backstage after the show, and I, honest to God, there you go. I can't remember where it was. I should, but I can't.
Well, in terms of the legendary artists you work with, it's a very long and great list. But was there ever almost a, hey, I might be up for this Van Halen record or this Dave record scenario? Because those are people who both use kind of the producer who's not it, but was about to be it.
You mean, are there bands that I wanted to work with?
Were you ever up for a Roth album or Van Halen album based on the successes you had with some of their peers?
Oh yeah, only Foreigner. They asked me to come for a meeting, and I did. I met with them, and I was pretty excited about doing that. But they went to someone else. I was also up for the Blues Brothers and for Spinal Tap. And I was really excited about those. I actually passed on the Blues Brothers. And Spinal Tap, I think, wound up using Lukather or a few other producers. But it was nice to be considered. I was a big fan of both.
Oh, so most of the things that happened were pitched to you, meaning it's not like for every one gig you accepted, you turned down 4.
No. And especially in the beginning, they were my choices because I signed them. So it was Ted and Cheap Trick and Molly Hatchet. That represented 13 albums that I did for Epic, for those 3 bands, all gold or platinum. And then then I was independent. I turned down probably at least several projects that didn't excite me. Nobody famous. There are bands that I would like to have worked with, but it just never happened because I think the A&R community regarded me as some kind of metalhead, which I wasn't.
Well, winding down here and bringing it back to the book here, I'm sure you had to cut a couple 100 pages of stories and ideas to make this book, because it's not like it's a 2-year event that you summed up into a thing and you had to stretch it. It's the opposite, where you had to kind of put 30 to 40 years of history into a book, and a lot of stuff was lost. And I'm sure after you wrote it, you went, oh, I could have talked about that. Do you think a second book might be possible?
No, not interested. And honestly, I don't think there's enough to be as entertaining as this one is. I've told most everything worthwhile, I think, is in this book regarding what I did. There was one chapter about Springsteen that I threw out. It was largely negative. Right now, the only negative chapter is Twisted Sister. Everything else is positive, because I felt positively about everything else, regardless of how they may have felt about the albums or me. The Springsteen thing was really interesting, but my editor said, you really don't. And the rest of the book is so nice and positive, and you took the high road. I don't think you need to recount, this series of events. It was just it was something that Bruce did that threatened my whole career, really. And it was naive of him and very self-serving. I almost lost my job because of it. So that's gone. And then there were a number of, less significant bands that I had stories about, but I don't think that they held the allure of the bigger bands. If you're going to tell a story, you should tell it about Motley Crue rather than the Graveyard Train, for instance. That was a Geffen project that I did in the 90s. Loved it, but it didn't do anything, and nobody would know what I was talking about.
Well, two quick questions before I let you go. And the first one, this isn't meant to be an insult. I love the band Dokken, but was there a more dysfunctional band that you worked with than Dokken?
No, no. Everybody else was very, very functional. In fact, and some of the ones that were failures or not as big as I thought they should be were incredibly tight and efficient. It was just George Lynch, really. He's right up there with Dee Snider about remembering fiction. I've read a couple of his interviews where they've asked about the fact that I did the record but didn't mix it and didn't finish it. And he said, well, he actually said that I came into the studio with a change thing on my belt to give them quarters, and then I urged them to play video games. I mean, that's just insane. I don't understand where these people come up with this. Sometimes I just think that it's an essential quality of rock and roll musicians that they have to, they have to dump on somebody. They have to dump on other people to elevate themselves. I'm not sure what it is. The only negative experience that I had during a project was George. Everybody else was fine until, a decade and a half later, or in Dee's case, a day later.
Yeah, I from being on the inside after the fact, I'm aware of how shoestring budgety everything with Twisted Sister was, and so that's why things only got better after the fact, and that's why they can look back at everything being so bad. But the positive last question for you is, what's the last concert that you went to as a fan that you went, I want to see this band live?
Steely Dan at Tanglewood. Actually, Steely Dan, Pete Townsend, and Roger Daltrey all separately, all at Tanglewood, which is 2 miles from where I'm sitting. It's the summer home of the Boston Symphony. It's heaven. And they started having pop groups about 10 years ago, before and after the Boston Symphony Orchestra season, which is July and August. Anyway, yeah, my son made me go to Steely Dan. It was fantastic. Probably in the top 7 or 8 concerts I've seen in my life, and I have seen some historic, incredible concerts because I was in New York starting in 1963. Perfect place to be, perfect time.
That son, A&R extraordinaire Dan Werman.
Yeah, that's Dan at Warner Records. Yeah,
there you go.
He's an A&R guy. It's great. But when he tells me how he does his job, it's alien completely. I mean, it has nothing to do with how we did our jobs as A&R people in the 70s and 80s.
but it's great to see the lineage of music business know-how is continuing. So
Yeah.
congrats to Dan on that. Congrats to you on writing and finishing a book. Everyone can write a book. Not everyone can finish a book and then actually get it out. So congrats to you on that. And I hope there is a Leftovers second edition, Springsteen and all. But in the meantime, congrats, Tom.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure talking with you.